This is a Willets Point Shea Stadium bound 7 express train. The next and last stop is Willets Point, Shea Stadium.
Oh, yes, it is the Subway to Shea podcast. Anthony Rivera here with you, talking about all the news and happenings surrounding that team from Queens, the New York Mets. Episode 184 from the Subway to Shea studios in my office. Make sure you like the show. Make sure you're subscribing to the Subway to Shea on YouTube. You can check us out on Apple Podcasts and Spotify if you prefer to listen. You can follow me on X, Instagram, and TikTok at Subway to Shea. And you can follow me personally on X at Ant Rivera 86. We are on the road to spring training, and I thought of no better guest to bring on. We did the same exact show last season, and I thought, why not? Let's do it again. We went to the NLCS, so why not try this again? Hope for some more magic here. Keith Raad, Mets radio play-by-play broadcaster. You can hear him on WCBS 880 and Audacy, alongside Mets Hall of Famer Howie Rose. Follow him at Keith Raad. Keith, welcome back to the Subway to Shea podcast. How you doing, my friend?
Very good. You said it yourself. Last time we did this podcast, the Mets went to the NLCS, so why not try again?
Absolutely. And spring training just around the corner. Pitchers and catchers will come out on Valentine's Day. First squad workouts on February 17th. And then the first Grapefruit League game, which will happen at Clover Park in Port St. Lucie on February 22nd against the Astros, which will be a split squad here. We got to start off the show. And shout out to everyone that's in the chat and coming on to the show. Leave your comments, leave your questions. We'll try to get to as many as possible here while I'm here with Keith. Obviously, we got to talk about the polar bear. The polar bear made his return to the New York Mets. Andy Martino was the first on it for SNY with the signing. John Heyman of the New York Post saying a 2-year, $54 million deal with a $10 million signing bonus. To add on to that, Will Salmon at The Athletic, $30 million first year, which is the highest AAV for any first baseman. Second year, if he decides to stay and not opt out, would be $24 million, no deferred money. The Mets were also offering Pete Alonso a different type of deal, a 3-year deal, which instead he chose the 2-year deal because of the high AAV. But that 3-year deal would have been worth $71 million at 27, 22, and then 22 when it comes to the average annual value. And this deal got done kind of in a face-to-face fashion with David Stearns and Steve Cohen meeting up with Pete Alonso and Scott Boras in Tampa. At the end of the day, this deal, I think, works perfect for both sides. I know Pete's not getting what he sought out for at the beginning of the offseason, but to come in as the highest paid first baseman, I think is a big deal for him. It was something that it was really important because there was obviously a deal out there in Toronto that he could have signed as well. The Mets also make out on this deal, are only really committed to the 1 year right now, unless, obviously Pete Alonso, if he has a bad year, maybe he stays and opts in, or maybe he takes another chance on himself again in the offseason. But Keith, do you agree with this being kind of the best of both worlds for both Pete Alonso and the New York Mets?
I do, and it's been kind of an ugly process. I don't think even the fans have been happy about it because it took so long to get done. But I think the Mets, once the Mets shortened it from probably Pete's dream of 6-7 years, making me a lifetime Met, once they shortened it down to 3 years, where you can sign anybody for 3 years if you're nervous that Pete's going to age maybe not so gracefully, is that you can shorten it down, but then Pete's going to want something in return. And so that's where the negotiation, I think, hit a stalemate over the last few weeks, which was, great, you can have me on a short-term deal, but I need a little bit more money and I need another chance to prove myself, which is why, this is a 2-year deal. But like you said, there's an opt-out. And 99.9% of me thinks that this is a 1-year deal for Pete Alonso to go out and try it again. And so for the third time, Pete Alonso can kind of bet on himself. And the Mets get a chance that if it doesn't really work out, they can say, Pete, we brought you back. We gave you a chance. It's not going to work out. Or it works out great. The Mets have an amazing year. Pete has an amazing year. And the Mets say, go find another deal out there somewhere. And we're right back here again. But there's no doubt Pete Alonso makes the Mets better today in 2025. And when you sign these short deals like we've seen David Stearns do with pitchers, you're going to get the most out of somebody who's a little ticked off, trying to prove himself. And you want to kind of awaken a sleeping polar bear, for lack of a better phrase.
And I hope so. I really do hope so. Yet last season, it felt like so much weight was on his shoulder with this contract, negotiations taking place. Him turning down, I think it was the 7-year, 158, which would, been a big deal for not only him but for the Mets. And now you come and has to take the 2-year deal. Bet on himself again, like you mentioned. I actually thought he was going to make out better this offseason, considering he was really one of the top 2 free agent first basemen outside of Christian Walker, but there was a lot of trades that were made. When you look at Nathaniel Lowe, Josh Naylor, people were taking chances on the Yankees took a chance on Paul Goldschmidt for 1 year. So it really comes down to Pete, I guess. Obviously he wanted to be the highest paid first baseman, but I don't think he wanted to leave New York either. Otherwise he would have went to Toronto and took that deal.
Yeah, that's what makes this kind of an in-between. Listen, these players want to get paid a lot of money, and the reason they do that is because the system kind of works against them, where for the first few years you're in the major leagues, you can't set the price for what you're doing. You're getting paid league minimum. And so when you do get a chance for that big payday, you want to say, hey, can you pay me for what I did a little bit and for what I'm about to do? And so Pete wants the most money possible, but he doesn't want to leave. You're absolutely right. And so there's this kind of in-between spot where, he could have signed the 3-year deal and been loyal, but is that really loyal in Pete's case, thinking the Mets, do they want me for a long time or not? So Pete says, let's do this for, the highest AAV at $30 million. I'll come right back and maybe we'll renegotiate again next year. But, he knows his place and his legacy. And if you look at, David Wright's getting his number retired, and he did a media tour recently, and it's so important. We're not really talking about, David Wright's numbers. We know the numbers, we feel them. We're talking about his legacy and what David Wright means to Mets fans. Eventually, Pete Alonso would love to have that legacy, that feeling. And leaving, you eliminate that whole thing. And so I think Pete knows that. That's why negotiations are not so fun. That's why you have agents that do it for you, because they get a little ugly. But I think Pete knows he's trying to toe the line between pay me, please, for what I'm doing, and I want to be here. And it's not fun to see how the sausage is made. And I think that all the fans got to see that recently. But he's back. He's in a Met uniform. And again, he, like you said, he could have gone somewhere else. He decided not to. And I hope that it works out for everybody.
Yeah, I think what is he about? Is it 27 homers away or
26 or 27? Yeah, he's going to pass it this year. There's no doubt in my mind that he's going to be the all-time home run leader in Mets history. The question I was thinking about, is Juan Soto going to break that record in 15 years? I don't know the answer to that. But for right now, Mets history has been lacking that forever star in a multitude of ways, right? Tom Seaver is a Met, but really he threw a no-hitter for the Reds. There's a lot of things that happened that Tom
300 with the White Sox.
Yeah. And Darryl Strawberry, I know that got a little messy when Darryl left, but Darryl didn't want to leave either. Him and Doc Gooden, their careers cut short. So who do you have out there? David Wright, yes, but his career gets cut short. The Mets fans want, and I'm missing a whole lot of people, but you want somebody to hold on to from start to finish in their career. There's no doubt about that. The team on the other side of the city, they have so many of those guys. The Mets just want one, and you can see why Mets fans just want him here so badly.
I thought that everyone did a great job at Amazing Day. I really wanted the fans to speak their mind. This was the opportunity. You had David Stearns and you had Steve Cohen at the forefront, and the fans were out there chanting for Pete, wanting Pete back. I thought it was a big deal for them to do that. I also thought it was a big deal for David Stearns and Steve Cohen to be as transparent as possible, which they were with their answers, and it kind of calmed the fans down a little bit. And I kind of think this really set things in motion with talks opening back up with Pete.
I was in the room at Citi Field that day when Steve basically, I think he's stood up for David Stearns in a way that David was trying to be professional and corporate about it and not explain what was going on behind the scenes, to be fair to both sides. And David got booed because he was, telling everybody about young players. And this is what you do when you don't want to talk about the truth for a reason. You want negotiating power. And then that's when Steve didn't grab the microphone, but he told everybody what's going on. And I never saw or felt a room like that go from boos to seconds later cheers. When Steve got done talking about that he hated the negotiation, what was going on, things are asymmetric. The fans appreciated that more than they did bringing back Pete Alonso. We just want to know what's going on. And that's New York for you. We want to know why or how is it going. Don't give us this line. Yeah, it's a good line when David is talking about, hey, we have some young players coming up. But these Mets fans, if you just give them a little bit of truth, a little bit more honesty, at the end of the day, the applause speaks for itself. But I'll never forget being in that room at Citi Field going, first of all, I can't believe you said that. I can't believe all those cheers happened.
Outside of a trade for a starting pitcher and the Mets bringing back, Mr. OMG himself, Jose Iglesias, how do you think the Mets did this offseason, and what grade would you give David Stearns for the moves that he made?
Well, I think it's, to me, it's an A+ because of Juan Soto. And I know it's one player, but a lot of people think Steve Cohen's dollars got this over the finish line, and there's no doubt about that. But David Stearns' team in 2024 that got to the NLCS, that at times and in places on paper, Mets fans and myself were thinking, this is fringe stuff. Some of these guys that they're signing are bare bones. Do they really have anything left? Can you count on them? And that roster was 2 games away from going to the World Series. So Juan Soto sees that and comes to the Mets. He didn't come to the Mets just to take a ton of money and play for a team that's not going to be doing much for 15 years. He saw what could be built in a very short amount of time. So in that case, getting Juan Soto, out-dueling the Yankees for that, straight ahead, it's a seismic shift in baseball in the city. And I think that's true. I think Yankee fans know that that's true. And Mets fans can carry themselves with a little bit more bravado than they have in the last few years. But then, the Pete stuff, I can see being a little bit strange for, folks going, they just spent upwards of almost $800 million on Soto. They can't, extend a couple more dollars for Pete, but they're trying to do it in a certain way. I was a little bit surprised, starting pitching wise, that David didn't go all in on some guys like maybe a Jack Flaherty on a short-term deal, which he signed with Detroit. Not that Jack Flaherty is going to save the world 2025, but the starting rotation, once again, like last year, has us going, okay, but in last year's starting rotation with Minaya and Severino, we went, wow. But for every one of those, there's an Adrian Hauser in there that didn't do so well. So who will be the guys that step up this year, and who will be the guys that will be on their way out? I think if you don't sign Soto, we're talking about a different grade. But because they signed Juan Soto, I think it shows an allegiance between front office and ownership and a direction. And it's going to be a signal to everybody else that's going to become a free agent, come to the New York Mets. And as we will go into spring training, which I'm sure we'll talk about, the roster is who's coming this year. Where are the Mets getting just a little bit better at maybe some of those fringe positions that they had last year? Who's a little bit better than the guy in his spot in 2024? And I think that's where David Stearns is going to take some steps forward around Juan Soto.
I know it doesn't get really a lot of respect for David Stearns when it comes to these like little minor deals that he brings in, these fringe relievers and all that. But there are days when the Mets are going to have to play double headers and they need the 27th man and there's injuries. So him making all these moves and not just, you see a lot of teams just sit on their hands and not do anything. So the fact that he's looking in each possible area to improve this team, I think is very important. Now, I know the Dodgers, they continue to add to this team. A lot of stars want to go there. They keep adding them, but it took them over a decade to get to this point in time, which the Mets are trying to do. And probably, I would assume that this is now a 2-year thing, because I know Cohen tried doing it for the first 4 years here, but now under Stearns and a sense of direction, we're really in year 2 of this mode of this David Stearns type team where he's not going to overspend for starting pitching. That's a little bit older. Even the way he went about bringing in Juan Soto and Pete Alonso on the 2-year deal, a lot of it's about youth for him and bringing youthful players. So that's a very interesting to continue to watch moving forward, and it's going to take time.
To me, I think, going into last year, you have a new guy in the house, smart guy from Harvard. Who is this David Stearns? Some people know him, some people don't. And then all of a sudden he makes these signs that most Met fans in New York, we heard it all, right? He's a small market GM. Well, the small market GM, who happens to be a genius, took the Mets to the NLCS. So coming into 2025, in my opinion, nobody should say a word about anybody that David Stearns brings in. Why do you think you know more than he does? Again, that's New York for you. That's why we all do this, because we're so supercharged about who we think should be on the team. But you have to give David Stearns the leeway to know. I don't know why they signed Griffin Canning. I wouldn't have signed Griffin Canning, but they might go out and show you exactly why they signed Griffin Canning. Jose Iglesias, he was cooked, right? His career was done. Not in David Stern's mind last year. Luis Severino, he's got a 6+ ERA. His career might be over. Nope. Sean Manaea, kind of a journeyman starter, third or fourth starter, becomes the ace of the staff. You have got to take a step back and let Stearns cook.
Going back to Jose Iglesias, do you see a path for him to return, or is it just like, let's leave OMG in 2024? Because they offered him a 1-year deal, and he's still looking for a 1-year deal, according to Pat Ragazzo of SI.com. Nothing imminent. They did sign Nick Madrigal to a 1-year split contract. Last season, in 51 games, he batted .221, had 10 RBIs and a .535 OPS. They don't right now at the moment have a backup, shortstop, which could be possible if they bring back a Jose Iglesias.
With Iglesias, it's not a popular opinion, but in my opinion, I think last year was a shooting star for Jose and his career, and the OMG song. Certainly that anthem will continue to be played at Citi Field, but it's hard to envision Jose Iglesias coming off of literally, Anthony, his best year as a major leaguer, doing that again. And I know people are going to say, well, how can you prove that? And I'm going to ask you, why do you think he's going to do the same thing again? So I don't think they sign him because I think they know that he's just a 1-year deal guy. They have to move forward. Is he going to be playing every day? The devil's advocate in me, I love Jose Iglesias. I would love to have him back. He's such a mentor for the young guys in the infield. He's a vibes guy, and we found out that without him and those vibes last year, things might not have taken off. However, if you look at the infield this year, you have McNeil back and healthy. You have Vientos. You have Lindor, of course. But now you get Ronnie Mauricio back. They aren't giving up on Brett Beatty yet. Luis Angel Acuna. Jet Williams is close. You have these young infielders, and you're going to need a place for them to play, and they cost a little bit less than Jose Iglesias, who, if you sign him back and it doesn't work out, did it finish with a bad taste in your mouth? Or do you kind of finish on a high note like last year and let 2024, the OMG Grimace Mets, let them be and move forward? That's, unfortunately, I know it's not popular, but that's where I see it.
Now, I know I did say that the Mets don't have a backup shortstop, which is not true. They do have one in Luis Angel Acuna, who you mentioned. At Amazing Day, Carlos Mendoza said that he thinks Acuna will have a huge role on this team in 2025. Do you think Acuna makes this opening day roster if, there's no injuries and, everything goes as planned in spring training? We saw a little taste of him last season when Lindor got hurt late in the season. He played second, he played short, he even made the postseason roster. So what are your thoughts on Acuna and if he can be a part of this roster at opening day?
Yeah, I can see for sure a situation where Acuna is on the opening day roster. I don't think he's going to be on the roster the whole year. The way I see it is Acuna's maybe on the bench until Ronnie Mauricio is fully healthy. Then once Mauricio is healthy, you put him in the big leagues, because Acuna, we all could kind of see it after the first maybe week of insane success that he had, is that there was a little bit of strike zone discipline that he needs to work on. Now, what the Mets are looking at is what we were all kind of confused by last year. Mets people told me when Acuna came up and Francisco Lindor got hurt, hey, his glove's really good. You can tell he's aggressive at the plate. He's just not quite big league bat ready. And then that same person had to eat their words. 5 days later when Acuna hit home runs in like 3 straight games, I'm going, you told me this kid wasn't ready. He's ready. And that is true. But the bright lights of the big leagues brought out more in Luis Angel Acuna than we all anticipated. Maybe AAA got a little bit boring for him. Some guys are like that. I don't know why. I'm sure they just feed on the pressure. And maybe the Mets want more out of Acuna and put him in the big leagues to do that. But in the trajectory of things, Ronnie Mauricio is maybe a little bit closer, a little bit stronger. at the big league level, and Acuna is not far at all. If he makes the big league roster and Mauricio goes down to AAA, I'd be very surprised, but only because Ronnie Mauricio is not quite ready yet. I don't think Acuna is quite ready yet, but he showed some insane hunger last year.
Let's get into the outlook for each portion of this team and this roster. We're going to talk and start off with the Mets lineup, the Mets bench. And I made a little bit of a graphic here to post so we can check out. Here we go. Leading off Francisco. And this lineup right here, obviously subject to change, but I kind of took it from what SNY had posted. Seems a lot of other lineups are similar to that. Francisco Lindor leading off with Juan Soto batting second, Pete Alonso third, Mark Vientos fourth at third base, Brandon Nimmo left field and batting fifth. You have the combination of Starling Marte, Jesse Winker as your DH, Francisco Alvarez batting seventh, Jeff McNeil eighth at second base, and Jose Siri in center field. Now the bench so far, either Marte or Winker, one of those guys is going to be on the bench for sure. You got Tyrone Taylor as well, Luis Torrens, and then that final spot, right? You got Nick Madrigal, you got Jared Young that can make a possible appearance, Luis Angel Acuna, Ronnie Mauricio, and I think I blocked his name by accident, Brett Beatty as well on the roster. How would you configure this lineup, especially that the middle of the order, and this is a good problem to have, which I could feel can go in so many different ways.
Yeah, this is kind of the vision that I have as well too. I know people are saying, well, let's hit Soto lower in the order. No, you want Juan Soto second because you want him getting the most number of at bats over the full season. He'll get more if he's batting second than he would third or fourth. The thing is about Soto, he's going to get on base. We know that Lindor is going to get on base too. So you have two guys that are going to get on base. So it'll be up to Alonso, Nimmo, and Vientos to try to drive them in. And all of a sudden you're fat, you're thick with some heavy bats. Like, all of a sudden Marte and Winker are split in the DH spot. Alvarez is a 7 hitter. That's pretty good. That takes a lot off of his plate. He also can hit the ball out of the ballpark. Jeff McNeil and then Jose Siri can run into 25 bombs. I do still think you're going to have, probably a glove man coming off the bench. That's where Nick Madrigal fits in as, he's probably the equivalent of what Jose Iglesias is that as the game gets deeper, you have a lead. The Mets took Mark Vientos out of the game last year at third base late in the game to settle things down defensively. Maybe that's where Madrigal fits in. I think those kind of guys are important early in the year. I know the Mets probably want to get off to a better start this year than they did last year. That, of course, obvious. But winning those games, locking down games early in the season is crucial. So, yeah, I mean, that's pretty close. And to be honest with you, I know Brandon Nimmo got off end of the season poorly last year, but if Nimmo's strong and he's your cleanup hitter, I liked that move last year. The flip to get Lindor into the leadoff spot and Nimmo out of the leadoff spot. I know it hurt to look at, right? Because it's not what we're used to seeing, but it was terrific. And Nimmo ripped up the league in June. And then the plantar fasciitis thing is certainly concerning moving forward. But right now, Nimmo and Vientos, because of the lefty-righty thing, you have to kind of hit Nimmo ahead of Vientos. Or do you flip Pete, bat him fifth, and put Vientos third? You could probably do something there. But I like this Mets lineup. I mean, the bench is strong. I'm good with it. I mean, this is a lineup that I think can win a lot of games. It was amazing at the end of last year. And now you have Juan Soto, who's going to get on base, half the time. So just go ahead and drive him in. Anybody in blue and orange, drive him in.
Joel C has a comment here that's interesting to me because we have seen Pete hit second, and he thinks Pete needs to hit second and have Soto hit behind him. If Pete hits behind Soto will never swing the bat, have 220 walks, and it will be like when he played with the Padres all over again. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, first of all, I totally get that. But, the Moneyball adage, can he get on base? And Soto gets paid all that money, not because he's the best hitter on the planet, but also because he's the best hitter on the planet and he walks. If you get on base and you create traffic, Lindor gets a base hit and Soto walks, first and second, nobody out, you will sign up for that inning every single time possible. And if you do that over the course of 450, 500 at-bats, and Soto's on base 200, 250 of those 500, the chances of him scoring are incredibly high. If he's hitting, third or fourth, he's going to maybe have 450 for the year, and you just want to increase the number of chances that he's getting on base, which is why I would hit him second. And listen, if he walks and Pete comes up and spots, this is why the Mets were so push and pull with Pete this year. You've got another chance. You're going to have the table set, drive them in. And if they can't do that, who are you going to find that's going to do that? You're going to have Soto on base every single time. You got to drive him in.
I know everyone wants to see the trio of Lindor, Soto, Alonso. It's all we've been talking about ever since, even before Pete signed the possibility. But is it weird that I'm more intrigued by the progression and maturation of Mark Vientos in another season and Francisco Alvarez coming back from injury? I think that's very intriguing to me.
Yeah, I mean, Vientos, I forget the exact number, but if you did what he did last year, over 162, you're looking at like 38, 39 home runs, which is crazy talk. I'd hope he comes close to that again. And you do worry about the sophomore slump, but, in the season of 162 games like last year, Mark would go through 3 or 4 games where he couldn't find it, and then he would snap out of it. 3 or 4 games where he couldn't find it, and then he would snap out of it. And that is an indication that, okay, the league is adjusting to him because he's tearing it up. He'll figure it out again. And this year, think about the added confidence of just the full offseason to feel what he did last year. He's going to be great. And Francisco Alvarez, I am just waiting. I think we all feel it, right? It comes up in the 8th inning, guys on base, and he takes that daddy hack on a heater or a breaking ball and misses, and the whole building is like, oh man, he's right there. And last year, that injury definitely slowed him down, where the clock in his mind, he looked up at the board and went, well, I hit 20-something bombs last year. I only have 3 or 4, and it's June, July. Like, I have to catch up. That game he played with himself that a young player will do, it screws you up because you want to do so well. So I think a fresh start for Alvarez. Again, he would be hitting 7th. Did you imagine he hits 30 bombs hitting in the 7th spot? It's possible if he can, figure it out this year.
When I go back to Mark Vientos, I know that there's always the talk about the sophomore slump, but I think he, going through that playoff run that he did, where he's probably had the second best playoff since the Daniel Murphy run in 2015. That's got to go a long way into not only confidence, but even with now the Mets keeping him at third base, I was a little concerned moving him after he just got comfortable. Obviously, not the best third baseman, but for what we needed, very serviceable and provided a great bat. Like you said, never slumped for a long period of time and was very clutch in big spots, especially in the postseason.
And that's a dream, right? For a team to have a young player that, think about all the names we've talked about. It's been Beatty, it's been Alvarez. Vientos was kind of on the back burner, and then he gets his chance and takes off. You just want one of these guys to figure out. They crushed it in the minor leagues, AA, AAA. Who's going to translate it up here? And Vientos did that. And in the postseason, you're right. He, even in Game 6 where they lost to the Dodgers, he hit that home run. You're thinking, here we go again. Maybe they make the comeback. And again, in the face of adversity in his life, in the face of adversity in the midst of a slump or in a game, Mark Vientos is unafraid. And that's a dream for a team because when you get up here, you have all the talent in the world from the minor leagues. You know how to do it. It's the attitude of, I can do it. I'm going to do it. Up here, I've already done it. Can I translate that? And that's why I think Vientos is so impressive. And the playoffs, it's scary. You're a young player. You don't want to screw up. The lights are bright. And then there's Mark with the sunglasses on, the big smile. He is swaggy V for a reason, unafraid. And again, it's just the beginning.
You mentioned Brandon Nimmo, and it's so crazy to think that he really did have a tough season last year. And even through that tough season, still was able to get 90 RBIs. To me is just wild. Is there any concern heading into this season with Nimmo and his foot? He, answering questions at Amazing Day, he did seem a little bit, worried about the foot and how's it's going in the progression of that injury.
Yeah, that's an injury, plantar fasciitis, that, it lack for a better phrase, kind of cripples anybody. Young, old, it's devastating to do that. You literally can't move. So I'm a little bit nervous by it. I think the Mets, looking ahead, can they find somebody that, maybe Nimmo is the guy that sits in place of Tyrone Taylor more often, just to get him back to normal. But if he can hit and without any pain or problems, and running is going to be hard. But if you can hit, I mean, Brandon Nimmo is one of those players that is never satisfied with his game. I mean, he signed that contract and said, you know what, I want to add more power to my game. You know what, I want to steal more bases this year. Like, that doesn't happen very often with a player. I'm Pete Alonso, I'm going to hit 40 and drive in 100, and that's it. But you don't see somebody going, I'm going to hit for average this year. I'm going to add more doubles, or Pete Alonso saying, I want to steal more bases. Not to knock on Pete Alonso, but just players have an identity. Brandon doesn't have one and doesn't want one. He wants to continue to get better. And again, like Mark Vientos and mentality, it's all about having an edge up here, and Nimmo wanting that edge. I hope that he figured out the plantar fasciitis. This is actually a funny story. In L.A., getting on the bus to go to the stadium, I forget which game it was, but Brandon was certainly hobbled by the plantar fasciitis. I got an email on my phone from a fan that just said, I opened it up, and it was pages and pages of this person's cure for plantar fasciitis. And at the end, it says, can you please give this to Brandon Nimmo? So Brandon comes on the bus, and I go, hey, Brandon, have you seen anything like this? He goes, you wouldn't believe all the fans that are sending me, herbal supplements and do this, rest, ice, compression, elevation, relax. So he knows, the fans know. I hope for Brandon's sake that they get it figured out, because spring is a lot of work. Spring training, we're going to know in 10 or 12 days how Brandon is feeling. And there may be some openings in the outfield if Nimmo is not an everyday player. I hope that's not the case, but that's how the Mets have to view it.
Blunt Thought Sports has a great comment here. It says the fact that all these different versions of the lineup, make it in a good way. It's all these problems to have is good problems. You really can't go wrong anyway. Having said that, he's intrigued by hitting Vientos second between Lindor and Soto. And we saw the Mets offense kind of light up. Once Lindor moved to leadoff spot, they put Vientos behind him. That 1-2 punch for a while was really, really good.
Yeah, again, that second spot in the lineup, I forget if it was Mike Trout when Trout was healthy, and then when Aaron Judge started to do his thing at like 2017-18, you're kind of going, where do you hit the best hitter, the best all-around hitter, the guy for average, the guy for power? And it turns out to be second, because again, you're at the end of the season, you're going to have more bats than if you hit third or fourth. It may be a few more, but you want to get up more than you're not up. So I like Vientos hitting second, but even in that Yankee lineup last year, Soto was hitting ahead of Judge. You want to get on base for those guys that are going to drive him in. And so Soto just happens to be the best all-around hitter in the game. I mean, I'm sure Aaron Judge would want to punch me in the arm for saying that, but I like Vientos hitting second. It's not a bad thing that he's not, but Soto's going to be that guy for right now. And then they can move Vientos around too, because Vientos has such dangerous power to all fields. He can hit it out. He can hit one to right center into the gap. And that's why Vientos is such a weapon. And I'm with you. I mean, it's a deep lineup. You can do a lot of different configurations. Sure, they will against righties and lefties. Who's off, who's not. It'll be a lot of fun for Carlos Mendoza this year to tool around with that stuff.
Yeah, I feel like everything that everyone in the chat's putting here of the lineup they want to see, I feel like we're going to see an iteration of that throughout the entire season. Everything's going to be tried out here. They've done it in the past where they, move all. I haven't seen a consistent lineup, I think, since maybe it was like 2006, where you kind of knew who was going to bat in that order when it was Beltran and Wright and Reyes. You kind of knew where those guys were going to bat, and baseball has just changed since then, and the whole putting together a lineup has changed, and probably for the better, and to get the best out of these players. Shout out 120 people in the room with us. I have Keith Raad, Mets radio play-by-play host. You can hear him on WCBS 880 as well as the Audacy app. We're going to switch gears here and go into the starting rotation, and I also got a little bit of a graphic for that for us. As of right now, Sean Manaea, Kodai Senga, David Peterson, I have penciled in there as well, Frankie Montas and Clay Holmes as the 5 starters, but I assume that the Mets are going to go into this with 6. And in the final spot, I have, Paul Blackburn and Griffin Canning with a star, being that one of these guys could be in the bullpen. And I for funsies, I wanted to throw Brandon Sproat in there. He's down there in spring training right now. we all know the way David Stearns operates when acquiring starting pitching. But to me, I think he's taking a significant gamble in hoping, lightning strikes twice here. Am I wrong to think that?
No, I mean, you're just, with this, you're just taking sizable risk with some of the names that you pick and you sign, like, Frankie Montas. You have to understand too that Stearns, the way he does it, think about the player, right? You have like Manaea last year and Severino, and now this year you have Frankie Montas and Clay Holmes. These guys want to prove something. I'll sign for whatever. Give me a shot and let me give you my absolute best so that I can go out. I mean, Severino signed the biggest deal in A's history, right? Like after his year last year, after everyone thought he was cooked. But he was given that 1 year chance to prove himself, make a change, follow what the Mets pitching philosophy is, and go from there. And this year, you're taking a little bit of that risk again with Montas and Holmes. Again, who knows what Griffin Canning is, but I like it, even though most fans would say no to that. They want someone more tried and true, which I totally understand. Pencil him in for 35 starts. Give me an ace. You need an ace to go far. But, I mean, these guys, you could get an insane year out of Montas. Clay Holmes could turn into an amazing starting pitcher, or they won't, and you cut bait and move on. So it's a unique strategy that David Stearns is using, maybe waiting until Sproat's ready and Tidwell is ready and Dom Hamill is finally ready. There's some of those minor league guys that could come up and you don't have to sign them for $30 million over 2 years. You have $750,000 on your payroll for them. That's what the hope is, and it's going to be maybe a revolving door for the pitching staff for the next few years because of those strategies. But you understand why they work, right? I mean, look at how Manaea did and how Severino did, because they were given that opportunity to prove themselves again. And every single guy, if you go through Senga, right? He's going to have to prove himself this year again, even though he's making a lot of money. David Peterson, was last year a fluke? Did you get lucky, or did you make a change? Did you actually figure something out that was different? Peterson pitched some huge games last year. Paul Blackburn, the man's never been healthy in his major league career. Came over at the trade deadline, got hurt again. He has something to prove this year. When you do that, when you dangle the carrot on the stick for competitors, they want to eat that carrot. And that's why David Stearns' strategy is so unique. It can be frustrating, but really works sometimes.
Which of these new acquisitions that the Mets made are you looking forward to seeing pitch the most, and why?
It's a good question. I think Holmes is unique because I really, really, really want to know how they're going to figure it out. Because Clay Holmes has never thrown more than 70 innings in a season, you need to have a starting pitcher arsenal versus a reliever arsenal. And, as a reliever, Edwin Diaz throws fastball slider. You can get away with that for an inning. You can't get away with that for 5 innings. You have to throw a bunch of different pitches. And so Holmes does have a few different pitches, but how do they figure Clay Holmes out? That's one. And then, again, I'm kind of with everybody else. I think Montas is going to be really good. Why in the world are they signing Griffin Canning in a good way? What are they going to find with this guy where, right, that Fox is going to come in and do a Saturday game in May and be like, where did the Mets get Griffin Canning? They figured out his changeup is insane. I like those projects because you don't see them coming. That's why we're all in love with what Iglesias did last year and Severino and Manaea, because you just don't expect it. But can you find that diamond in the rough within a guy? And I think those two are unique. I think overarching theme, though, I truly think Kodai Senga is going to have an amazing year. I think he is still elite in baseball. If you didn't pitch for a year, you are totally forgotten about, even though your talent is still terrific. And what we saw in year one with Senga was he got better as the year went on. And the way he finished was incredible. 2025 for Senga, it sucked. 2024 sucked, excuse me. It was embarrassing. He wanted to be out there. He felt like he wasn't part of the team. And not that he let them down in the playoffs, but that wasn't him. We all know that wasn't him. A 1 or 2 inning Kodai Senga. Is he healthy? Is he not? So I think coming into this year, Kodai wants to be part of this. He's going to be really good. And of all the starters, he is the one with the highest ceiling, right? He could be the most elite if everybody pitched at their very best, that their parents wanted them to, right? Kodai could be the best one out of all of them if he's right. And I truly think he'll be right.
You think Sean Manaea can keep up with that arm slot angle that he was doing? Because he changed it after seeing Chris Sale. When Chris Sale came with Atlanta, I think I was at that game, and I was just amazed at how well Chris Sale's pitching. I think that was, if I'm for certain, that might have been the no-hitter game that they were about to throw, and then I think JD Martinez hit a home run in the ninth to end that. But I think it was that game. Chris Sale was amazing, and just to see Sean Manaea switch his arm slot and was able to carry that for like the entire rest of the season there, I thought that was huge. We all know he got tired in the postseason. Does Sean Manaea fall back into? Is he somewhere in between? Do we get to see another level of Sean Manaea that we haven't seen before?
I think what Manaea learned last year working with Jeremy Hefner, some of the biggest takeaways from him were just, it's so weird to say, right? Because this is a guy 8, 9, 10 years in. He felt more and more like himself the more he lowered his arm. And it's like, how did we get here where it takes 10 years for you to feel comfortable with your body? But when you go to different places and you have different pitching coaches and pitching philosophies that tell you, do this, do that, they didn't ask you how you feel about it. They just want you to do it. Jeremy Hefner is a little bit more of a therapist. That's why he works so well. He tries to feel each guy out in a different way. And Sean Manaea and him clicked. And so as the year went on, the tinkering, this late in his career, it's kind of like that Nimmo-esque tinkering. How can I get better? I think Sean Manaea last year established what he does really well, the arm slot, right? Toward the end of the year, he started to figure that out. He went on that really amazing run in August and September. And you're absolutely right. He ran out of gas in the playoffs. I think that's why he didn't start game one against the Dodgers. They tried to give him an extra day, and it just ran out of gas. So I think coming into this year, where you know that feeling, you know what's expected, you know you don't have to introduce yourself to a new pitching coach. You can do the same things. I think he wants to get his changeup better this year. That's probably the only real big improvement. But now it's going to be, can you pace yourself out over the full season to be ready in October? There's a little bit of the Mets that in October – they were running on fumes, vibes, whatever you want to call it. By the time they ran into the Dodgers hit them with their best shot, and the Mets could only hit back with so much because it was exhausting emotionally on everybody to get that far. Coming into this year, now you know what that feels like. You know I have to be really, really good to get there, but also have something left when we get in there. And I think that's going to be the biggest thing for Manaea this year. Again, another guy, too, that wants to be here. He could have signed a huge deal somewhere else. Yeah. Not for a lot of years, but for a lot of money. And he came back because he wants to be here. He's a big-time vibes guy, like an Iglesias was. So someone who's just salt of the earth in that clubhouse that makes everybody better, leads by example, quiet, good guy, hard worker. I like the signing. I didn't think they would do it because I didn't think David Stearns would want to shell out a ton of money for Manaea. Well, he didn't have to because Sean said, maybe I'll punt on $5 or $6 more million a year, and I'll come back to the Mets because this is where I want to be.
Yeah, it seems like Stearns-Cohen combination in this front office, it really feels like they got outside of Juan Soto, who, you're going to have to do the outbidding for. It seems like the Mets got everyone they wanted on the deals that they wanted. And that even goes into arbitration as well. You look at the numbers and they fared pretty well in arbitration. One last thing on the rotation, because I assume that we are going to see somewhat of a 6-man thing here. I mentioned the names there, based on stuff alone and what you've seen, who do you think starts the season in the rotation in that last spot? Is it a Paul Blackburn? Is it a Griffin Canning? Could we possibly see, Brandon Sproat here come up here just the way that Christian Scott did last season?
The Sproat one is so crazy interesting because he absolutely flew up the system last year to the point where I think it got, some of the New York writers were asking David Stearns, are we going to see this kid this year? And in the Mets' eyes, Sproat, I think, went too fast for them. So I think they want to see how he does in spring, see how he does in big league camp. Start him off in some spring training games, I would imagine, see how he feels. If the lights get bright for him there, I do think that they start Sproat out, barring an insane spring. I think they start him out in AAA just to get him used to the baseball again. It's a different ball in AAA than it is at some of the lower levels of the minors. That's why a lot of guys struggle. So I'd love to see Sproat, but I don't think they want to throw him into the fire in April because what we learned from David Stearns, you don't have to win the division or a wild card spot in March and April. You can win it when you need to win it in August and September, and Sproul could be that guy. So the 6th starter, I do know I want to see Paul Blackburn this year because I thought he's just like that perfect 4 or 5 guy that'll give you 5 good innings. I think he's going to start out a little bit late because of that spinal surgery that he had last year. So I'm looking at, like you said, Griffin, Canning. What are they going to do with Buto? Are they going to make Buto a starter again? That's, I think, something that they might have thought about going into the offseason. You still have Tyler McGill there. So that 6th spot, it's again, deeper. You have a lot more options. I think last year it was Adrian Hauser, Tyler McGill, and bust. I mean, this year you're going to have Canning and Blackburn along with Buto and McGill to choose from. So I wonder how they handle that because with Holmes, is Holmes going to give you 4 in the beginning of the season? Is he going to give you 5 innings? I don't know how they ramp him up because, again, he's a reliever turned starter. Does he have a piggybacker, somebody that throws behind him every single time in the rotation? A lot of questions when you put this starting rotation together. But for now, I'm guessing Canning is the guy. McGill still, he has, it's amazing. He has some of the best stuff just individually in the Mets clubhouse. Just putting it together is the hard part. Where are they with him? He's always tried to put his best foot forward. He's always kind of been okay, right, as that spot starter. And then what do they do with Buto? These are some of the things that are swirling around my little head right now.
And we saw magic from Jose Buto pretty much that second half, that beginning of the second half of the season, when Reed Garrett was hurt, when Edwin Diaz was out on suspension and was dealing with injuries. Jose Buto and Daniel Nunez really carried the bullpen. My thing with Jose Buto is I feel like the Mets have to decide, is he going to be a starter? Is he going to be a reliever? Because we saw in the postseason, he came in game 2, pitched very well those couple of innings that he had, and then they brought him in the next day, and he has not fared well coming in after pitching in one day. And now if he goes as a starter, maybe he'll get 6 days rest and all that stuff. But if he's genuinely going to be a reliever, I think they have to decide on how they're going to go. He can't be a long guy and they can't have him wait because we saw with and the stats showed that he did not do well coming in day after day. The guy needed at least 2 or 3 days of rest.
Yeah, with Buto, like it was for Reed Garrett and Daniel Nunez, some of those guys recovery-wise were not as sharp on day 2 or day 3 in a row. And, a lot of the reason for that is something that Adam Ottavino was talking to him about that because he's been around the block for a long time. When you're a young guy like Buto is or Nunez or Garrett, you are fighting to stay up here, right? You'll do literally whatever it physically takes to stay here. Throw me back to back. Throw me 5 in a row. I don't care. I don't want to go back to Syracuse. And sometimes when you do that, all of a sudden Reed Garrett throws in 3 games in a row and his arm is going to fall off. Now, are you going to tell the trainer my arm's going to fall off? They'll pull you back. Next thing you know, you're going back to Syracuse. And so, I think those guys pushed themselves. Like Buto pushed himself a lot more than he thought he had to up here in the major leagues versus being a starter. Because he was pitching in the 7th inning in New York City in the major leagues every single night. It is intense, right? If you're sitting in the stands going, how the heck's he going to get out of this? Imagine what he's feeling. That is literal physical, emotional stress. So he had to get used to that. And so by the time the season wrapped up, you're talking about weeks and weeks and weeks on top of each other of these stressful moments. It takes a toll on the body. And so I think the back-to-back, it was just the struggle was there because he was tired. They were all tired, and they have to learn that. And now coming into this year, I think it's more of a Jose, Reed, and Daniel Nunez. We like what you can do. We know that you can stay up here. So with that in the back of your mind, tell us if you're not feeling good. Tell us if you need an extra day. We'll keep you on the roster. We'll keep you around. We just need to know that. When you're trying to make a name for yourself at the big league level, you want to be available every day, even if you're not feeling good. And some of those guys probably pushed past that physical limit a little bit, and that's why they didn't bounce back well. But the Mets know that, and I think going into this year, they'll have remedies for that.
As we wrap up the talk with the rotation, a couple of good comments here from Bob Beer saying no one was pumped too much about Sevy and Minaya this time last year either with regards to the rest of the rotation. And he also said, Hauser, Short, Wendell, Jorge Lopez, risks taken. You don't work out, Stearns moves on. Something that we haven't seen with past iterations of the, Mets hierarchy in front office. Stearns knows when it's time to pull the plug, and he'll absolutely do that. We got the bullpen coming up here in the outlook, and Edwin Diaz will be 100%, I hope, healthy here coming in after last year coming into the season with that knee injury. You got the recent signings of A.J. Minter, the return of Ryan Stanek, Reed Garrett, Daniel Nunez, we mentioned Jose Budo, and the final spot, obviously you talk about Canning, Blackburn being that long guy as well, but you also have Tyler McGill in the fold, Sean Reed Foley, Danny Young could be another lefty. And these guys are also on the 40-man roster, Justin Hageman, Kevin Hergert, and Austin Warner, which I assume will get at least an invite to spring training here. We all know the way David Stearns operates when it comes to acquiring starting pitching. And when it comes to the bullpen, it's a whole lot different as well. I really feel like this is one of the stronger areas of this team. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do, because what we saw last year, what the Mets were really good at was some depth, right? You have those guys, those 6-7 guys, but you're going to need 20. I mean, that's not being facetious. You need 20 guys coming out of the bullpen, guys that we haven't even heard of yet stepping up. You just showed that comment of a fan that we didn't expect much out of Minaya and Severino last year. The Mets didn't even know who Daniel Nunez was last year, right? The guy was pitching in humongous games for the Mets at so many different points. But, you're right. And again, from year to year, how did the Mets get just a little bit better than they were last year in a spot? And so last year, who's your lefty out of the pen? Jake Diekman. Okay, guy's been around the block, walks a lot of guys. Can he keep that down? No, he didn't work out for the Mets, even though when he struck out Aaron Judge, I think all of our jaws dropped in that game against the Yankees. But this year, the lefty is A.J. Minter. I mean, that's a massive improvement. A guy that's been in the division, knows what it takes to pitch in high-leverage games for a full season, not just in the playoffs. So I think that's really big. You bring Ryan Stanek back, who struggled when he first came over, but toward the end of the year, right, in the playoffs, get Stanek in the game. Right? He was really, really hot, and so now he's back. And just the guy at the top of the list, though, is going to be everything. I mean, Edwin Diaz last year was his first year back, right? We forget that. And, it didn't go well at times. The confidence was shaken. Some of the great moments that we had last year as fans and us on the radio was watching Edwin come back to save a game that 20 minutes ago he just blew the lead, right? We want to see Edwin get outs 1, 2, and 3 in that order, no problem. It doesn't have to be what he did in 22 when he struck out half of the planet, but maybe something a little bit closer to that than 2024. If Diaz is elite, right, that takes the pressure off everybody else. So, it's a good, deep bullpen. There will be guys that pitch this year that will go, who is this guy? And he'll get out of a big jam and we'll go, we love this guy, right? That's what Stearns did last year, and I think that's what they're going to do this year. And so I think that, again, you just try to get a little bit better at every roster spot year over year and hope and pray that Edwin Diaz, who's making, $20 million, pitches like the elite closer that he has been.
Stanley Babbage in the chat also agreeing that he thinks that the bullpen is the strong point. I think when the season ends, when the 2025 season's over, we will look back on the return of Ryan Stanek and the signing of A.J. Minter and see how important they really are. Both serve multiple purposes. They can set up for Diaz, they can close in a pinch, and have very good postseason experience.
100%. And again, you need those guys, right? You need a safety net for Diaz, who, again, pitching on a back-to-back, or, I mean, imagine this, right? The Mets are playing the Dodgers again in the playoffs, and in the ninth inning, you're going to see Ohtani, Betts, and Freeman, lefty, righty, lefty. You're going to need an elite lefty to face those guys. Is that A.J. Minter? That's what you hope when you sign a guy like that. I mean, that's obviously down the road, but I mean, you have to look at that moving forward, and you'd rather have Minter there than maybe other lefties. And so it's a great signing. Crazy things can happen to relief pitchers. Some start on the opening day roster, and some get hurt, and some get put on waivers. So you never know how it finishes, but you'd like to keep those guys you go those guys together, and you hope Stanek can blow guys' doors off with 100, and Minter is just a tough lefty to face because he's been in those situations for so many years.
And even early in the season, a great point by Stan from Westport, we will see Stanek, Diaz, and Minter pitch in earlier innings this year at times. We saw Edwin Diaz in the postseason come in the 6th inning against Philadelphia, so I'm sure we will definitely see that. When it comes to Edwin Diaz and the up and down season he had last year, searching for the velocity, protecting the injured leg, that he came back from the World Baseball Classic. You had the suspension for the sticky stuff. Now that all of that is behind him, under his belt, recovering from the knee surgery, I think we are ready to see somewhat of that, that 2022 Diaz back, that Timmy Trumpets Diaz. I don't expect it 100% of a repeat of that, but something close to it at least.
Yeah, I wonder at what point in 24 Diaz felt like he had his legs underneath him, right? It takes a while to get back to just being you. And a Mets reliever last year told me, when Diaz was struggling in the beginning of the season, that he forgot how to fail. And just for a year on the shelf, watching, you forget what it physically feels like to give up a game in front of your fan base. And so you have to relearn how to do those things. And so it takes weeks and months to get that experience back. By the end of the year, you wanted to see maybe a little bit more improvement from Edwin. The sticky stuff thing to me was just a sign that he was feeling the pressure, right? Like he wasn't totally feeling comfortable with himself. Maybe he needed a little bit of help from an outside source. Turned out to be an illegal outside source. That to me meant that Edwin was trying to play catch up a little bit. And now he's got an NLCS appearance under his belt, full off season. You've got the same manager, the same pitching coach, right? It's not Buck Showalter to a new manager. Who are these people? I've been out for a year. I've been here. I know who's here. We're more comfortable. We're a unit. We're kind of bringing back a lot of the same guys. And I hope Edwin Diaz is just more confident in his stuff internally than he was from needing some help on the way in.
Johnny K saying, I'm liking the positivity in regards to our pitching. I agree with a lot of these takes today. I'm in the camp that we need one more good starting pitcher, and that he likes the arms that we have. That leads into the final segment of the show today, and that's the latest news and happenings, because the Mets have had some interest in Dylan Cease and Michael King out in San Diego, which was reported by Pat Ragazzo of Sports Illustrated. King last season 13-9 with a 2.95 ERA, had 201 strikeouts in 173 and 2/3 innings pitched. He finished 7th in the Cy Young voting. Cease 2024 season, 14-11 with a 3.47 ERA. He had 224 strikeouts in 189 and a 3rd innings pitch, and he finished 4th in the Cy Young voting. Which of these two pitchers would you prefer to trade for, and why?
Oof, you talk about King versus Cease. They're both really good. You don't want to face them when they're on the mound. I don't know. Both. I like Cease. I like Cease. I forget what King's contract status is. I'm sure he has a few more years of control, so he'd cost you a lot more. I know Cease is going into 25. This will be his last year under contract. And the reason why I would say Cease out of those two, especially if King has a few more years of control, is that if you trade for Dylan Cease, you're not really wondering who you're getting. You're getting the guy that you just outlined, all those terrific numbers. But once again, Stearns would find himself getting a guy on a 1-year deal, trying to prove to the rest of the league, pay me once this season is over. And that falls right in line with the MO of the rest of the starting rotation. It just so happens Dylan Cease would probably be 1 or 1A with Senga. I still think Senga can be that good, but it's going to cost you. And David Stearns, in these first year and a half of handling the prospects, he has, and I've heard this from teams that have called on the Mets, hey, we want to make a trade, give us Beatty or give us this person or that person in the minor leagues. And David Stearns has kind of held the prospects in maybe higher esteem and regard than those teams have. So the price is a little bit higher to get some of the Mets prospects. And I think Stearns is trying to just simply establish that, we're not open for business here. I mean, these guys we have are really good. And so I don't know who he would send back over for Dylan Cease, because the Padres, that price tag would be high. I know in the Soto deal to the Yankees, it's Soto, but the Yankees gave up a lot of pitching. Michael
Yeah.
King is unbelievable. Vasquez, Drew Thorpe, who am I missing? Johnny Brito. They gave up a lot of pitching. And what's the price tag going to be? Because the Padres are going to want guys that can help right away. And can the Mets get away with, we'll send you Tyler McGill in a package? It's, if you guys don't want McGill, why would we want McGill? So you have to think about it like that. But if they can get Cease, that'd be great. I would sign up for that in a heartbeat.
I think we'll still wait. I don't think anything happens. I would be shocked if something happens in spring training or this, the rest of this offseason, that if they make a trade. I think that's something more down the line for maybe the trade deadline. I think that the first thing that happens is maybe Brandon Sproat gets an opportunity, just like I said with the way Christian Scott does. Also, the Mets have shown interest in a reunion of sorts with Mark Canha, reported by John Heyman of the New York Post. They offered him a 1-year non-guaranteed type deal. Last season, he batted .242, had 7 homers, 42 RBIs, and a .690 OPS for 2 teams. He played for Detroit and San Francisco. And with the Mets, he batted .259, 19 homers, 90 RBIs, and a .754 OPS. What are your thoughts on a possible reunion with Canha? Obviously, it wouldn't be for him to start, but it'd be to have him on the roster at least and be a part of that bench.
Yeah, we love Mark Canha. We all are Mark Canha fans. I think that at the time that was kind of a Pete Alonso plan Q. If Pete didn't sign, Mark Vientos would play first. Maybe Mark Canha would be your backup first baseman. I think if the Mets were to extend Canha a deal, Mark Canha is a left fielder. And what we talked about before, Anthony, was what's Brandon Nimmo's plantar fasciitis? What's his situation? And if the Mets sign Mark Canha, which I don't think they will, because I think the ship has sailed position-wise with Pete coming back. But if they did, that would raise questions to me as to the health of a left fielder, Brandon Nimmo. But I love Mark. I love food. Mark loves food. I love talking food. So I would enjoy talking to him in the clubhouse more about different places to eat across the circuit. But I don't see the fit with Pete now back at first base, because I think Canha could play first base and he would have been the guy to back up Vientos.
You were at Amazing Day. The Mets revealed the new alternate jerseys, but they also have unveiled that they are switching up kind of what the road uniforms are. Kind of I don't want to say blast from the past, because that was not a good era in Mets baseball when they had the these kind of racing stripe type jerseys in the early 80s. I do tend to like them. I think it's a nice touch, and I think those pants will also go nice with the alternate jerseys. What are your thoughts on the new Mets away uniforms?
Yeah, I mean, I hope they bring a little more luck than the previous tenure where the Mets were something similar. But I'm all for it. Changing things up. The City Connects will be back this year. I was okay with those. I wasn't fall off my chair in love with them. But until I see them on the field, I don't really have a thought. I mean, I know we all, going into last year, we were wondering what the new jerseys would look like, the little names on the back, right? That didn't work out very well.
Yeah.
So until we actually see these guys on the field with them, I think I saw a video of Brandon Sproat today pitching in the pants. The pants look clean and crisp with the stripe down the side. But again, we'll have to see. I'm not a big jersey. I hate to use the phrase like jersey snob, but I like a clean look. Those road uniforms, the new ones, I think they're clean, get in and get out. And if you win in them, anything looks pretty good. That's what I say.
Yeah. Otherwise, if they have a really bad season, a quick change will happen to most of these uniforms for sure. You talked about your broadcast bites, and that's your tag on Instagram. What foods are you looking forward to this season coming up?
Well, I will say, if anyone's going to be in Port St. Lucie, tweet at me or Instagram DM or send a carrier pigeon. I'm going to be in Port St. Lucie this year for spring for 3 weeks straight, instead of in and out on the weekends like we do with our radio broadcast. So I will be this year trying to dedicate some of that extra time to exploring the East Coast of Florida and the cuisine out there. So I don't know if there's much Port St. Lucie cuisine. I don't know if that's a sentence that people use, but if there is, and you've been to spring training and you have suggestions for food, I'd love to get off on the right foot, maybe gain 8-10 pounds in spring and try to burn it all off toward the end of the year.
You mentioned the radio broadcast. Here's the schedule up here for the Mets on 880, starting off with that Astros game, which is the first one. They'll go into the Cardinals, Nationals, Rays, Red Sox, Cardinals again on the away side, Nationals, Cardinals, Miami, and then the Yankees on the home side. And I have these other ones blocked here, but Miami and the Yankees at home. Any teams you're looking forward to see? I know it's just spring, but any teams or any players you're looking forward to seeing during your broadcast?
Yeah, I'll give you one actually. The Saturday game, March the 1st, when we go to the west side of Florida at the Rays, the Mets, I guess, kind of parted ways with Eric Orzi for Jose Siri. That was one of the pieces that went to Tampa Bay. But the Rays also picked up Mike Vassell, who's a name that we were saying over the last few years. And I really think Mike has a chance to do something big with Tampa Bay this year because it's just a team with so much opportunity for a young pitcher with control. I mean that in team control and not actual on the mound control, which is important too. But, I don't know if it'll set up where Mike is pitching that day. But in a world, Anthony, where spring training is amazing, it's glorious, but most of the time you're playing the Astros, the Cardinals, or the Marlins, rinse, repeat. It'd be nice to go west and go somewhere else, Port Charlotte, play the Rays, and maybe see some old friends over there.
Well, Keith, I can't thank you enough for doing this again with me. This spring training, outlook. We did last year, got to the NLCS, doing it again this year with the hopes of maybe going to the World Series and finally winning a championship since 1986. Keith, it's been a pleasure. I can't thank you enough, and I hope you have a great spring. Have a safe trip out there, and let's enjoy some Mets baseball this season.
Anthony, always good to talk to you. Our tradition continues, these preseason conversations, and hopefully you've delivered a little bit more than the NLCS this year, so the pressure is on you, my friend.
Thanks so much. It's great talking to you. Have a good one.
You too.
All right, that's Keith, Raad, Mets radio play-by-play broadcaster. You can hear him on WCBS 880, on Audacy app as well, alongside Mets Hall of Famer Howie Rose. That wraps up the Subway to Shea podcast. Make sure you're following Subway to Shea on X, Instagram, and TikTok at Subway to Shea. You can follow me on X at AntRivera86 and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify if you like to listen to the show. And if you like to view it like we're doing right now, if you like being a part of the chat, and we're going to start doing more open panels like we did when Pete Alonso news broke of him resigning. We'll do more of that this season. We got a lot of good stuff coming up this season. Make sure you're tuned in to Subway to Shea. Like this video, subscribe, share all of the information so that all Met fans know where to come and get their Mets information. That wraps up the Subway to Shea podcast. For Anthony Rivera, let's go Mets.